These are the Chapter 35 lecture notes. Let's see. Chapter 35 is on the nervous system, the nerves and the nervous system. Here you see an image of, you probably recognize on the left, that's the spinal cord and the spinal nerves that extend from the spinal cord. You can see sort of an outline or shadow of the vertebrae that protect the spinal cord. And then on the right, it looks like neurons in the brain, maybe. Okay, a little bit about the evolution of the nervous system. Starting with, we don't have sponges up here because, of course, sponges don't even have true tissues, so we can't really discuss a sponge in terms of any kind of body system. But starting with the Cnidaria, they definitely have sensory ability because jellyfish and sea anemones and all of the members of the phylum Cnidaria are um, predators in a sense, and they sting their prey and paralyze their prey before they capture and eat it. So picture A is showing a polyp form of a cnidarian that actually it's a hydra, and which is a freshwater cnidarian, and they have enough sensory ability to detect movement. Um, and then you have the echinoderm, the phylum Echinodermata, and they've got a nerve ring. Actually, their nervous system follows along, outlines the same when we did our dissection in class. It outlines the same areas that compose the water vascular system. So, where the ring canal was located, you have a nerve ring, and then where the radial canal was located, you have radial nerves. So, definitely some sensory ability in the echinoderms. The planarian, which is a flatworm from the phylum Platyhelminthes, um, does have a head region with eye spots. Um, the eye spots are sensitive to light. A primitive brain, uh, central ganglia or ganglia is just like a collection of nerves. So this is a primitive brain because there's nowhere near the number of nerves in that ganglia that are in a typical brain. And there are two nerve cords instead of one, like one spinal cord. There are two nerve cords here and here that run down the lateral side of the planaria. And then there are transverse nerves that sort of form a ladder. They're definitely sensitive to touch and vibrations, and um, these are these little areas are sensitive to touch, I know, and maybe even sound vibrations. So um, then you get to the arthropods, and they have got another example of central ganglia, but instead of a dorsal nerve cord, they have a ventral nerve cord. The mollusk, here's an octopus, actually has a brain. The octopus is an extremely intelligent animal, um, able to problem solve. An octopus has nerves, an eye, actually a true eye, not just sensitive to light. And then, of course, you come to the vertebrates, which include humans, that have a quite a complex brain with a spinal cord and cranial nerves which extend from the brain and spinal nerves which extend from the spinal cord. So quite an extensive nervous system. Um, the hydras, so you can have some specific notes on the different groups of animals and their nervous system. The hydras, which represent the cnidarians, have a nerve net and it's composed of neurons. Now, a neuron is just another word for a nerve cell. So the neurons are in contact with one another and in contact with contractile epitheliomuscular cells. So contractile cells um, that produce movement. And planarians, which are from the phylum Platyhelminthes or flatworms, just to remind you, Platyhelminthes contains the planaria, the flukes, and the tapeworms. They have a ladder-like nervous system and the development of a head region, which is called cephalization. So there are nerve ganglia concentrated in that head region and sensory receptors for light and vibration and sound in the head region. So we start to see that cephalization in the flatworms. And then annelids, which are earthworms, arthropods, which are your insects, spiders, crabs, lobsters, crustaceans, and then mollusks, which are your soft-bodied organisms like clams and snails and octopus, are complex animals with true nervous systems. In the human, now we will focus on the human nervous system. Um, Another course that I teach is anatomy and physiology, so we go into quite a bit of detail with the human nervous system, and I'll try not to try to resist the urge to go into too much detail, but um, definitely I want you to understand how the nervous system is set up, so the organization. The central nervous system is simply the brain and the spinal cord. And the peripheral nervous system consists of nerves that extend from the brain and the spinal cord. So the nerves that extend from the brain are called cranial nerves, and nerves that extend from the spinal cord are called spinal nerves. And these nerves, cranial and spinal nerves, gather information from sensors and conduct decisions to effectors. So the sensors detect information, and the effectors are the target um, that basically um, responds to the sensory information. So, example, a sensor can detect if you step on a tack and it hurts your foot, and the information would be conducted to your spinal cord, which would integrate that information, and the effector would be the muscles of your leg when you lift it up off of the tack. So the effector would be actually your leg muscles. All right, the nervous system has three specific functions. I actually just explained all three. There's receiving sensory information that may be touch information, like heat and cold and pain, and performing integration, which means deciding what to do with that information. The brain and the spinal cord do the integration part. And then generating motor output. So motor output could be with whatever response occurs, after the integration step. So another example could be you touch a hot stove. Your hand, the sensory information is the stove is hot and it hurts you, and your um, brain and your spinal cord actually um, cause the skeletal muscles of your arm and your hand to lift your hand up off the stove. And this all happens very, very fast, um, in the span of less than a second, you know. Um, and then it could be information you're not even aware of. You don't even have a conscious awareness of that your nervous system receives this information and makes a decision and causes a response. So your glucose levels are, well, that's not good because that's more hormonal. I'm sorry. Um, so, uh, let's see. Carbon dioxide. Okay, so your carbon dioxide levels, your sensory nerves detect that your carbon dioxide levels are high. And what that generally means is your oxygen levels are low. So that will send a signal um, to your brain to tell you to, there's a breathing area in your brain, and that will tell you to your breathing rate to increase, and that can happen without you even being consciously aware of it. So that the effector there would be your uh, respiratory system, your lungs. Okay, nervous tissue. So a neuron is a nerve cell, and it contains three parts: a cell body, which is pretty typical of any cell. It contains a nucleus and other organelles like mitochondria and the Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. So it contains all the organelles that any cell would have. And then it contains dendrites that receive information, receive signals. So those are the receptors. And an axon, usually a single axon, that conducts a nerve impulse, an electrical impulse, um, to some target, some effector. A lot of axons are covered by an insulation called myelin, a myelin sheath, and that causes the nerve impulse to travel faster down the axon. And any long axon is called a nerve fiber. So when you hear that term nerve fiber, it's referring to a long axon. And here is a picture of a typical neuron. This one is called a multipolar neuron. You can see the cell body, and they're only showing the nucleus, but the cell body contains the nucleus and many other organelles. The dendrites, the areas of the neuron that receive signals. The axon begins somewhere around right here and is long, and it will carry an impulse away from the cell body to some target. In this case, you can see the target is just another neuron. Sometimes maybe that's part of a pathway, you know. Um, the synapse is where the neuron meets up with its target. So in this case, it's the axon of the neuron being shown in the picture is meeting up with the dendrites of a second neuron, and that's the synapse. You can also see that the myelin, so these coverings over the axon are called myelin. Those are insulation, and they allow the nerve impulse to be conducted much faster than it would be in an unmyelinated axon. This is the same, by the way, in electrical wires. An insulated electrical wire will conduct an electrical signal much faster than one that's not insulated. So that's the purpose of the myelin. Each of these areas that are uncovered are called nodes of Ranvier, these areas that are uncovered. And what happens is, instead of the signal traveling, I've already scribbled all over everything, but instead of the electrical signal or the nerve impulse traveling continuously all the way down the axon to the target, it jumps. It jumps from here to here to here to here. So that in that way, it goes much faster than if it had to travel continuously down the axon. The cells that actually wrap around the axon, they produce the wrappings or the myelin, are called oligodendrocytes, at least in the central nervous system. They have a different name in the peripheral nervous system. So down at the bottom, neurons contain organelles common to many other cells, such as a nucleus and mitochondria. They also have more specialized structures, including dendrites.